When I was 12 years old, I wrote self-insert Devil May Cry fanfiction. I printed out copies of this fanfiction, brought it to school with me, and showed it to my friends. Why am I telling you this extremely embarrassing personal anecdote? Because I need to communicate to you some small portion of just how enormous the Devil May Cry franchise has been to me for the entire duration of my teen and adult life. Playing Devil May Cry 5 was like eating Christmas pudding. And for the little literature nerd in me, all of the poetry references in the game were like the sweet, delicious little glacé cherries on top of the pudding. They're just so juicy and tasty. But a lot of you playing the game were probably wondering, what does all this poetry mean? Why is the game quoting poetry so much? And why this poetry in particular? Why not another poet? Well, the great thing is, and the reason I love it so much, is because the poetry is not just there to be stylish. The poetry actually really reflects the journey that Vergil takes throughout the game. Fortunately for you, there are ginormous nerds like myself out here who are ready and willing to give you a crash course on all things romantic poetry. Consider this video a character analysis of a fictional complete mess through the poetic lens of a real-life complete mess. Let's go. So in case you missed it, the poetry that V quotes throughout the entire game is by one William Blake, romantic poet from the late 1700s to early 1800s. If you have a look at the document in the game's library, you'll see a little bit of backstory about how Vergil loved Blake as a kid. So the key question that I want to address in this video is, why did the creators of Devil May Cry 5 choose William Blake of all poets to put in the game? And what does this choice tell us about V and Vergil's character development and journey? Alright, my hair's a little bit messy from the rocking out that I just did. So, who is William Blake? Blake was a poet, painter, engraver, and all-round radical badass of the Romantic period in Britain. Like most Romantic poets, he was pretty out there for his time, a bit of a mad lad. Organised religion? Crap. Marriage and chastity? Crap. Monarchy? Crap. Slavery? Crap. Classism? No. Revolution? Yes! He was a bit of an early feminist. He was a little new age, a little spiritual. He advocated a bit of a free love. This is all in the late 1700s, by the way, pretty out there for his time. He thought traditional Christianity suppressed natural human emotions and desires. This is important, by the way, we're going to come back to this point. And he actually designed his own mythology, which we'll see a lot of in Devil May Cry 5. He also claimed to see visions of gods and angels throughout his life, which led another Romantic poet, Wordsworth, to say, "There was no doubt that this poor man was mad." So yeah, a bit out there, but he was also voted the 38th greatest Brit of all time, so, you know, you win some, you lose some. What I want you to know by the end of this video is that the reason William Blake was chosen for Devil May Cry 5 is because one of Blake's massive things was the tension between human emotion and the divine, between reason and feeling. Repression of natural human emotions in favor of cold, hard law and reason was a big sticking point for Blake. He thought this was a big issue in his society, and it's probably still an issue now, to be honest. Now, we know that the tension between Vergil's human side and his demon side is a big driving force in his character. One might even say, a motivating factor. Throughout the entire series, Vergil shows so much disdain for humans and tries as hard as possible to fully embrace his demon side. This is because the weakness of his human side, he felt, is what led him to be unable to save his mother from being attacked and killed by demons. Now, let's get on to the specifics. I'm not going to look at every single poetry quote in the game because, to be honest, a lot of them are just in there for style and to be sick burns in battle, which is great. But I'm just going to focus on the most thematically important one. The first quote I'm going to touch on is the very first thing that we see in the game. This is a quote from Blake's poem, The Poison Tree. It reads, "And it grew both day and night, till it bore an apple bright." In this particular poem, he starts with, "I was angry with my friend, I told my wrath did end. I was angry with my foe, I told it not, my wrath did grow." So the apple that the tree produces is a product of the narrator's wrath, and eventually his foe eats the apple and he finds him dead under the tree the next day. So it's pretty obvious that the tree in the poem mirrors Vergil's Clipot tree that grows as a result of his ambition and his wrath. But the key thing here in the poem that I want to draw your attention to is the lack of telling of the anger. Vergil cannot communicate his anger and pain because he's too busy trying to repress all of his human feelings. And so it bursts up in the form of the Clipot, the poison tree. He shoves his anger down and it bursts out in violent displays. He rose the Temenaguru, he rose the Clipot tree. There's a bit of a pattern here of things bursting out from the ground. And what I like about this is the distinction between friend and foe. So when V, Vergil's human side, is going through the events of the game, we see him slowly open up to the people around him, namely Nero and his familiars. He's able to share some of his fears and worries with them, and this is partially what leads him to realize that it's in his best interest to embrace his humanity. Vergil, however, cannot share his feelings with his foes. We could consider one of his foes to be Dante, who he's not able to express his grief to, but one of his foes could also be himself, the human part of himself that he grapples and wrestles with, constantly at odds with, trying to push down what he sees as his human weakness. So he can't accept or admit the fact that he feels this anger and wrath, and it comes out in things like the poison tree. He himself is the foe that he wrestles with every day and hates for not being able to save their mother. Because Vergil can't find a healthy way to deal with his anger and grief, instead of expressing it healthily, getting rid of that anger, it channels and feeds into the Clipot tree, the poison tree, the poison fruit that we see in the game and find ourselves dealing with. The next poem I want to look at is one of the very first lines that V says when he appears in the game. He wanders into battle with Nero and he says,
"I curse my stars in pit of grief and woe. That made my love so high and me so low."
This one's from Blake's Poetical Sketches. I have to say, I had to ponder this one a little bit. At first, I didn't quite understand why they'd chosen this quote. At first glance, this poem looks to be about class division and unrequited love. The narrator is talking about how he's just a humble, lower class person, and his love is so much higher than him that they can't be together, and he's pining for her, and it ends up getting quite nasty. It's a weirdly romantic poem for V to have said, especially in such a key moment of his introduction. It is possible he's talking about Nero here, which I kind of like. He's commenting on his own low state of weakness and Nero's high state of strength in comparison. Maybe he's even talking about Yurizin. He might be talking about how he, V, is so weak and Yurizin, the stronger part of him, is so high. And he's maybe cursing his fate and circumstance that he had to be so weak that he can't defeat Yurizin by himself. However, I think there's a little bit more to it than that. See, this poem is known as one of Blake's songs of loss, and loss and grief is a massive, massive part of the human emotions that Blake talks about a lot in his poetry. In the full version of this poem, the ending is actually pretty violent. The narrator says he's going to tear the limbs off of his romantic rival and then die himself. Very nice. One of the things going on in this poem is the narrator confronting the fact that love itself, the human emotion, is the cause of his bitter grief. Grief causing someone to act out violently? Sounds a little bit like our mate Vergil. After all, it was the death of his mother that led him on his dark path. Fate and circumstance are also themes in this poem. The narrator curses his stars that he had to be born in the condition that he was, similar to how Vergil has to deal with the fact that his fate as a son of Sparta is what has caused him to be in the situation he's in. We have a lot of lyrics referring to fate and destiny in Bury the Light, which is such a banger, which tells us the importance of Vergil feeling like he didn't have the strength and the power to control his fate and what happened to his family as a child. Now, the next two poetry quotes are super important, and they get a little complex, but bear with me, we're going to do this, we're going to handle this. These quotes are from two of the most pivotal moments in Vergil's journey. The moment when he splits himself into Yurizin and V, and the moment when they rejoin themselves. So when we see him stab himself with the Yamato and split himself into two, he says this line.
"Heavy chain that does freeze my..."
In order to defeat his younger brother, He could only do one thing with the crumbling flesh and feelings.
The full line is actually break this heavy chain that does freeze my bones around. This quote is from Earth's Answer, a response to the introduction poem in Blake's Songs of Experience. In the introduction poem, this character of the bard sees Earth sleeping and asks her to wake up. Earth is imprisoned at this time, and this is almost like a come back to God moment. Now we know Blake wasn't the biggest fan of religion. In response to this, the Earth, imprisoned and embodied as a woman, says that she can't because she's being imprisoned by a jealous and tyrannical god. Now again, I want to point out that these are complex poems and there's a lot of different ways that you can interpret them, but one way is viewing it as a depiction of the fall of man into sin as being caused by a malicious god. Maybe like a demon. God here is selfish and life-restricting, keeping the earth, which represents joy, life, vitality, creation, keeping her bound. So when Earth asks, break this heavy chain that does freeze my bones around, she's asking to be free of this deadening, life-restricting force that is suppressing her. This is a really key moment for Vergil because this is when he splits himself into Yurizin and V.
He needed to separate man from devil with the strength of the Yamato.
Vergil's goal here is to split his human side off from his demon side so his demon side can go on and continue to survive. But what he actually does is freeze his humanity as V to live on independently and be free of the suppression of human emotions and human impulses that Vergil's tried to chain him with for this whole time. By breaking the heavy chain that is freezing his humanity, he actually gives his human side a second lease on life. He lets V out to live and discover himself on what it means to be a human. There's a similar reference to being bound and caged in Visions of V. When V defeats the vision of Vergil as Nilo Angelo during the events of the game, he quotes Blake's The Schoolboy. What he's really talking about here is how V, the human side of Vergil, has been caged and imprisoned and needs to be let out. He can't be kept suppressed for eternity. In Earth's Answer, Blake is calling for the Earth to rise up again and be transformed. And this is what we see Vergil doing at the end of Devil May Cry 5. Now, the second key quote here is what V says when he reunites himself with Yurizin.
While thy branches mix with mine, and our roots together join.
This one's from the poem Love and Harmony United. This is a much more optimistic poem and it's a bit more straightforward. Two opposites are able to unite and come together again. A key symbol in this poem is the turtle dove. A turtle dove is a symbol of peace and atonement. And by reuniting his human side with his demon side with the new revelations that he's gotten throughout the course of the game, Vergil is able to take a step on the path to some sort of atonement, some kind of redemption for what he's done as Yurizin and everything else he's done throughout his life, which has been pretty dodge. When Vergil reappeared in 5, you do not understand. I was like a war widow waiting for my MIA soldier husband to come back from the war. I don't know if he's dead or captured. It's been 10 years. And then one day he just rocks up on the doorstep and I just a lot of feelings. There's a lot. Anyway, since we're on the topic of Yurizin now, let's talk about Yurizin.
I am power. Absolute.
This is one of the massive symbolic images in the game, and it's so interesting to see how the creators took aspects from Blake's mythology and adapted them into the story. A lot of people talking about Yurizin are like, oh yeah, it's Dante's reason, it's your reason for fighting. And I'm like, well, you're not wrong, but there's a lot more to it than that. Yurizin is actually Blake's evil god of reason in his mythology. So the general consensus is that your reason, sort of the pun thing going on there, is human reason, human judgment and law and intellect. Yurizin is described as a demon and a shadow of horror, pretty accurate to what we see in the game. His first appearance is in the Book of Yurizin, very creatively named, Blake, thank you. This was Blake's attempt to rewrite the biblical scriptures and sort of parody the Book of Genesis. The main theme of this one is theological tyranny. We're getting a bit more of the impression that Blake really didn't like religion. Here's the thing. In Blake's version of the creation of the world, the fall of mankind into sin actually happens at the moment the world was created by Yurizin. because in doing this, Yurizin has split himself off from the eternal sort of forces of whatever. Pure, cold, unfeeling reason tries to divide himself away from everything else in order to create a world that he can rule over, and the world is fucked. Who else divides themselves? Vergil. That's right, he divides himself into V and Yurizin, his human feeling side and his cold, rational demon side. Are we getting the point here? In Blake's work, Yurizin's division actually causes death to enter the universe for the first time, and there's a lot of death in Devil May Cry 5 going on. When Yurizin splits himself off in Blake's poem, he actually splits himself off from the character of Los, who represents human feeling and imagination. And this is important. Yurizin is in anguish rent from his side, much how V is forcibly ripped away from Yurizin in the game. And here's an important point. Los is described as howling and gnashing and groaning in pain until the wound is healed. But the wrenching of Yurizin healed not. This is basically what happens to V and Yurizin in the game. V is able to heal his emotional wounds, heal his trauma, face his past and his nightmares, and figure out a healthy way to move forward. Whereas Yurizin is stuck and bound, mired in his hatred and his grief. In the poem, Los leaves Yurizin bound, weeping in a state of dismal woe. Yurizin and Vergil can't heal without his humanity. Yurizin represents restriction, control, repression, rules and laws that contain human emotions and desires. It's not just the external world that Yurizin wants to control, however. In the game, Yurizin represents the part of Vergil that wants to suppress and control his own emotions and desires. He wants to shove down his humanity and pretend it doesn't exist.
That last shred of humanity that you still had? You just lost it.
Blake describes Yurizin's existence as like nets and traps that catch the joys of eternity. And V realizes this when he's able to live as himself. So, Vergil divided his human and his demon side up, and Blake wrote so much about the division between the human and the divine, between emotion and reason, between imagination and freedom, and rules and restriction. A big theme in Blake is that the body and the soul are not separate entities, but they are one. And he's really fixated on the fact that humans should embrace and accept their pleasures and desires and impulses and joys. A bit of that free love going on again. Vergil's been repressing his human side for a long time, but when was the last time we know that he gave in to a few of those human desires? Enter Nero, the product of Vergil's human desires. Nero is warm, loving, full of life. He's in love with a human woman. He wants family. He, perhaps even more than V, is emblematic of the human side that Vergil tossed away. But surprise, it's back. There it is. There's your human boy. I feel like Nero really came into his own as a character in 5. He really has a purpose in the story, which is his humanity and passion is what makes Dante and Vergil realize that they actually need to give a shit about their family. I mean, yeah, they give a shit, but they need to not be assholes to each other, basically. Even though Nero's a dumbass himself, he is able to slap some sense into those two dumbasses and get them on the path to some kind of reconciliation, some sort of not completely batshit insane family dynamic. If the Sons of Sparta could not be complete idiots for like half a second in their lives, it would be amazing. I actually feel like I'm gonna gain a lot of respect for Kyrie in 6 because I'm just like, how's she gonna deal with these three? Oh, that poor woman. Now, Nero has some parallels to Orc, who in Blake's mythology is the son of Los. Remember, that's the other side of Yurizin. Orc and Yurizin are meant to be opposites. Yurizin is the older destructive force, and Orc is the younger creative life-giving force. Yurizin and Orc fight each other at many points in Blake's mythology. Normally, Blake's endings are kind of grim and Yurizin usually defeats Orc. But in Devil May Cry 5, we see a more positive and uplifting ending to this Yurizin-Orc conflict. We see a resolution where the divided Yurizin is able to reunite himself with the help of his son. As we've been discussing, Blake was really noted for having what T.S. Eliot called a profound interest in human emotions. And as we know, human emotions are what Vergil really struggles with. Vergil loved Blake as a child when he was still in touch with his human emotions, but after the trauma that he went through when his mother was killed, he suppressed these human emotions until he became V, who is absolutely fixated on William Blake. The Visions of V manga especially emphasizes just how badly Vergil wanted to discard these supposedly weak human emotions in himself. In Visions of V and in the game, V recites the famous opening lines from Blake's Auguries of Innocence, which is a poem about the tension between childhood innocence and the maturation into experience and adulthood.
Heaven of a wildflower, holding infinity on half a yearning, and eternity in an hour.
These lines about human imagination, beauty, and feeling, V comments that these are the very sentiments that Vergil threw away. However, through his experiences as V, both in the game and in the manga, he is able to reconcile and understand the value of these human sentiments. He realizes that the reason why Vergil always lost against Dante is because Dante could understand and accept his human side, whereas Vergil never could. He lacked humanity, he repressed his human feeling, until the heavy chains that were keeping V bound were broken and he was able to self-actualize and live as his human self, without the bonds of his demonic heritage holding him back. And at the end of the game, that image of Vergil leaving the poetry book with Nero is, to me, symbolic of the fact that Vergil's now entrusting his human feelings to Nero, the son that he's finally come to know and recognize. So in conclusion, Blake's mythology is all about the tension between the human and the divine, between emotion and reason, in this case, the human and the demonic. Blake harshly criticizes religion and law for suppressing human natural desires and impulses, and in the Devil May Cry world, we can parallel religion with the legacy of Sparta. After all, Sparta did have his own cult in Fortuna, but even more than that, Vergil grappling with the legacy of Sparta is what causes him to suppress his human emotions, thinking that they're weak. Just like Blake's god restricts earthly feelings, like in the poem Earth's Answer that we talked about before, so does Vergil's demonic side try to suppress his human side. And it's not until his human side is freed that he's able to actually understand its value. So Blake is saying this is what happens when you try to divide your human side and your demon side, Vergil. It's not going to end well for you. Blake wanted to see the human spirit triumphant over reason, and in the game we see Vergil's human side triumphant, or more accurately, they're reconciled, united. He's able to understand how to live with both his human and his demon sides. God, it feels like we've only scratched the surface when it comes to all of the Blake content in Devil May Cry 5. But this should at least give you a good overview of Yurizin and the poetry quotes and what it tells us about Vergil's past, his backstory, you could even say his... I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna say it. His motivation.
Come on.
By the way, I found this shirt by Andemüller just as I was about to upload this video, and I think it's fake, guys. I think I need it. Look at it!